cryptocurrency, DeFi, NFTs? Sounds confusing? BitLab Academy is here to help. We make it simple. Start investing in crypto, learn trading fundamentals, learn to mint and trade NFTs. Join our community today. Crypto for beginners, taught by the pros.
Welcome to Rice TVX. On today's Rice Report, I am joined by author, speaker, researcher, and one of the OGs of the truth movement, Edward Griffin. He has been on the show before, and I will include a link down below in the video description and above for his first appearance. Be sure to check that episode out. Most of you might know Edward Griffin as the author of the book, The Creature From Jekyll Island. Before we get into it, visit ricetvx.com and sign up for my mailing list so you never miss an update or new Rice TVX content. You will also find my various social media links and more. You can also find Rice TVX on Odyssey and Library, where I have a full catalog of my videos, post up extra content, and share other appearances. And you can also find Rice TVX on BitChute. Get your free half ounce of silver. Take full advantage of my partnership with Money Metals Exchange in 5 easy steps. 1. Visit moneymetals.com. 2. Be a first-time buyer. 3. Purchase a minimum of $100. 4. Use the promo code RICE. 5. Get a free half ounce of silver, and it's an additional way to support the channel. I will include links in the video description for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything shared on today's video. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by Edward Griffin. Now, he has been on the show before. I will have a link down below and above for his first appearance, and I definitely encourage you to check that out. Some of you may know he's an author, speaker, and researcher, and I've learned a lot from him from the book that he's most famous for, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Mr. G, welcome back to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, and I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. I appreciate you giving me your time, and definitely looking forward to this one as well. So before we get into some of the topics that we had mentioned talking about, the first thing that I would like to do is share some of your links, which will include the Reality Zone website, Red Pill Expo, and Red Pill University. And also will include links for your Twitter account as well. And one thing that I will suggest people check out is the upcoming Red Pill Expo. That's going to be happening on July 9th and 10th in Indianapolis, Indiana. Do you have anything that you want to share about this upcoming event, Mr. G?
Well, yes, I could talk all day on that one. To me, the Red Pill Expo and the Red Pill University are what we call the Red Pill Project. And in my mind, it's the most important thing I've ever done because it has the capacity built into it. If we had enough people sign on to it, and we only need about 15% of the population, it's not something where you need the majority, but about 15% of the crusaders, and they're already out there. If they just knew that they were there and that they weren't alone, I think we have the capacity to beat the opposition, even at this late stage in the game. So yes, it's very, very important to me. And I urge people to go to the site and read all about it.
Is there anything in particular about this upcoming event in Indianapolis that you're excited about? I know you do a lot of these Red Pill Expos.
Well, yes, this is number 8 coming up. Last year, we switched to 2 per year. We started off as 1 per year. And then we realized that, hey, the clock is ticking. We've got to move faster. I think we've reached our maximum at 2 per year because it takes a lot of preparation and pulling together speakers that really have something to say, not the same old message over and over again about, defend the Constitution and fight the bad guys and we're the good guys. Write your congressman, let the president know what's going on. All of these silly things. That the war that we're in requires much more sophisticated action than that. So what's particular about this one? I suppose it's the latest one. That's what's unusual about it. And of course, everybody on our stage represents, they're from a profession or a life experience where they have discovered a red pill. And of course, for those that don't know about the red pill meme, it's taken from the science fiction movie, The Matrix. And the idea is that in the movie, if you took the red pill, you would discover what the world really was like and not live in some kind of a fantasy. So every one of our speakers has taken the red pill on something in their lives that was very, very important. And they're there to tell every one of us about it, so we don't have to learn the hard way, the way they did.
All right, I love it. And people will be able to, if they can't attend this in person in Indianapolis, Indiana, they can watch online, I'm assuming, based off the way the website reads.
Oh, that's absolutely correct. We know that most people can't go to Indianapolis. Ones who want to go, they're busy, they have families and jobs. But yeah, we have a very inexpensive live stream. And not only that, but it plays for a couple of months after the event as well. So if you can't look at it, all of it on the same day that it's happening, you'll have plenty of time to pick it up later. And as I mentioned, the cost is very, very modest.
Yeah, I was actually, usually I don't share costs, but I was curious as what the costs were. And yeah, this is very inexpensive. For the live stream, it would be $35. And it looks like this pricing was through April 30th, but this may still be ongoing since it's...
Well, now it's bumped all the way up to $40.
Is it up to, it's all the way up to 40?
Yeah.
Okay. So we got $5 edition, but even then, as you know, I've go to some of these cryptocurrency conferences, and some of those are rather pricey. Sometimes almost like a month's rent for some people, unfortunately. So this is definitely very, very feasible. I may be making
we're determined to reach out to as many people as we can. This is not about money. And now that you mentioned that, I think it's important to know that all of our speakers are volunteers. They get no honoraria. None of our leading managers in the expo, myself and all the decision makers, we're all volunteers. We get no money out of this. Every penny goes into the operation itself. So, you know, some of these guys are used to getting big honoraria for their speeches, but they come knowing that they're going to be donating their time. And that's the only way we can have so many speakers and keep the cost down. So it's this is a heart of passion, it's a love, and everybody is determined to defend liberty and freedom.
Now, you did have the opportunity to do one of the expos on Jekyll Island, correct?
Yes.
And when was that?
Yes. Well, that was 2020.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It was early
I'd have
summer.
to look it up. It might have been in 2021. Anyway, it was one or the other. I'd have to look it up. It gets kind of blurred in my mind of what happened, where, and when.
Oh,
it wasn't long ago.
Yeah, these past couple of years will definitely do that to most people. Yeah. It definitely blended a lot. And it's been definitely an interesting experience. You know, one of the things that I had mentioned to you before we started recording is you're very well known for the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And you're somebody who I mentioned in the first time that you've been on the show. You're somebody who I've learned a lot from. And I really appreciate all the time that you've given to the truth movement, being one of the OGs. And this book is definitely one of the most cited books for truthers who are talking about the Federal Reserve. And what's interesting about this whole thing is this Creature from Jekyll Island. You know, last time I talked to you, it was like, look what the creature has become. But even since then, since August 5th of 2020 was the last time we talked. Since then, it's as if even more things have come to fruition for what the Federal Reserve was built for. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would, but I would add to it that it's coming to fruition in a way that most of us did not anticipate. And by that, I mean that I think if we look at what's happening to the monetary systems of the world, and definitely including the United States, the central banks of the world have decided to go for broke on it. They're not trying to sustain a steady rate of inflation. They're not trying to keep people in place. I think they've come to the point where they want to just destroy everything and destroy the money supply. The inflation rate will be out of control very soon, and it's already getting that way for those who've been to the store lately. And they're destroying food supplies. They're destroying delivery systems. They're destroying everything they can to bring America and all the civilized world to its knees, so that people will be dependent on governments for their food, their health care, their shelter, the protection against all kinds of boogeymens like terrorists and viruses and so forth, so that people will be just afraid totally for their lives and their existence. They won't be able to afford food. The stores will be empty. The shelves will be empty. And people then are on their knees begging for food and water and all that kind of thing. It's a horrible scenario that I see coming up soon. And it's being done on purpose. This is hard for most people to understand or to believe. They want to send letters to their congressman and say, don't you know that what you're doing is dangerous and it's destructive? What they don't realize, of course they know. That's why they're doing it, because they want people to become on welfare and all kinds of support systems from the government, so that they will become obedient servants of the government. And so I think the economy is entering a stage. The banks are now playing their role in that, and the creators of the money supply are definitely creating their role in that, or serving their role, so that inflation will be out of sight. The money supply is expanding at a rate greater than ever before in history, even in the worst cases in Germany. And there's no end except total destruction. And I know that these people who are doing it are not stupid. They know that destruction is coming, but they're plunging ahead anyway. So I have to assume that that's what they want to do. And it all fits the grand design of these people, these globalists. It takes on different words and different phrases. Now it's the Great Reset, but it all is the same thing. It's just the total consolidation of all forms of economic survival and physical survival into the hands of the ruling elite who are in control of the government. So that's it. That's a new phase in the world. We've never seen that happen in the world before. Even where inflation has destroyed nations, the rulers of those nations were fighting desperately to prevent it, because they wanted to keep the goose that lays the golden egg alive. But now they're trying to kill the goose, because they have a new goose in mind. And that's this Great Reset thing they're talking about. So I expect that our monetary system is going to change very drastically, and probably fairly soon. And by that, I mean in the next few years. The American dollar will be bust. The yen, all the currencies of the world will be in even worse shape, and because those countries don't have military to enforce acceptance of their currency. And so this thing is now global. We've never seen that before in the world. It's always been nation by nation, and there's always been a place to go or some currency to run to protect your assets if you have much of that. But now it's global, and it seems like all of these people at the tops of their respective countries are working together in harmony, and they're trying to build this thing they call the New World Order, and they're determined to do it, and they want to do it in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you made a lot of really good points. Consolidation of power, I definitely would say, is a lot of what's going on. Now, the Federal Reserve, we can see since they've gotten in power, since they've gotten control of the money supply and the monetary policy of the United States since 1913, we've just seen a decline in the dollar. And over the past couple years, due to everything that we've experienced, we've printed up, I've seen anywhere between like 25 to 50% of the money supply between 2020 to today that we have in existence. And so that's one of the reasons why we're having all this inflation. And there's a lot of different economists who are arguing about hyperinflationary depression. There's some people talking about deflation. The Federal Reserve is just raised interest rates again, 0.75 basis points or 75 basis points. And we're recording this on the 10th of May. Tomorrow, the CPI data comes out. I'll be releasing a couple clips from this interview, and then a full interview will come out this Thursday, the 12th. What are your thoughts with the Federal Reserve, what they're trying to do with the interest rates, comparatively, since we have this high form of inflation that they're technically trying to fight, the problem that they created? What are your thoughts on just that scenario of inflation, deflation, and the Federal Reserve and their interest rates?
I think that all of the old metrics are becoming more and more useless. I think what they want is destruction, as I said a moment ago. And so when you start, you're creating a situation of scarcity and falling production, and at the same time you raise interest rates. This is disastrous. This is not the free market at work. This is deliberate, planned destruction. And they're trying to put the little businessman out of business, so there'd be just a few big box companies left, like Amazon and so forth, and big companies that are all part of the plan. They are the elite, actually, those very super large corporations. And they're working hand in glove with the governments of the world. But they want to put everybody else out of business so that everybody is in line and dependent entirely either on sources that come from the big corporations or government largesse, So I think this is different from anything we've seen before. And interest rates become increasingly meaningless when you have a system of totalitarian dominance over the money supply and interest rates and so forth, because it now is it's economy by demand. Or by decree, I should say, not by demand, but by decree. And it's sort of like it was in Nazi Germany, only more so. It's more like the Chinese model today. I think what they really want, in fact, I know that's what they really want because they have said so, and everything you see confirms that. What they want is they want to adopt the Chinese model of social credit system. And on that model, money becomes meaningless because there really is no money anymore. You have a credit card, maybe, but it has numbers on it. And the numbers that you have, the quantity of those numbers, depends on your social credit. Your social credit depends on how obedient you are and how compliant you are. And if you're people like us, you don't have many numbers at all. You may not even have a card, and you'll have to beg for food and everything else. And you say, but wait, I've got dollars in my shoebox here. Well, they don't accept dollars anymore because dollars have gone out the window long ago. I'm looking ahead a little bit and say, but I got my silver and my gold. Well, that's illegal. So thank you for telling us that. We're coming to pick it up in the morning. This sort of thing. We're talking about a totalitarian system. This is deadly serious. This is no fun anymore. This is not an academic discussion. This is what's happening and being built right under our noses.
I would agree 100%. And I've had also a couple different perspectives on some things that I wanted to kind of throw by you. I've had some really interesting conversations regarding the Federal Reserve, regarding New York. When I say New York, like the stock markets, Wall Street, your commercial and banks like your JP Morgans, your Citibanks, your Bank of Americas and such. If you look at the World Economic Forum's Great Reset agenda, and it seems that they're very much working with the IMF and the ECB, the European Central Bank. And the European Central Bank seems to be kind of a test bed model for this, almost like China was with the social credit system. But at the same time, what the World Economic Forum is trying to do is get rid of all the banking except for central banking, which would get rid of your JP Morgans and your Citibanks, your commercial banks. So I've had a really interesting discussion about the idea that the Federal Reserve and Wall Street are trying to fight against the World Economic Forum, the IMF, the ECB, which are pushing for globalization. And I know that these aren't like I look at this as the lesser of two evils. I mean, there's no good guy in this situation, basically. I'm not saying the Federal Reserve is good, but it looks as if they're trying to preserve the dollar and not go towards a globalist agenda, but they have an agenda of their own. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting proposition. I've heard that said before. I frankly, at this point in time, I don't see it that way. I see the banks in transition, so they will be the administrators of the Great Reset. The credit system, the social credit system, will be administered by the banks, who become branches of the New World Order. And we began to see that. I think I noticed it markedly about 6 years ago, when I began to see that the various branches of the Bank of America that I did business in were redesigning their buildings and their offices. It used to be that you went into the bank and there was a bunch of counters at one side with, places with people behind them, the tellers to take care of cash transactions and check deposits and all that, and a bunch of desks on the other side where you could sit down and talk to an officer. And all of a sudden, that was changed. And I think the biggest Bank of America office in our area, I walked into it, I didn't recognize it. They were all cupolas, like little places where you go sit down and talk to investment advisors. And one little corner way in the back was where, if you had some money to deposit, cash, or wanted some coins or something like that, one little corner was left for customers. And it was clear to me that the banks are in transition to changing their way of doing business and their representation of what they do as a bank. I think they're moving out of the field of being bankers, as far as the public is concerned, and being monetary advisors or investment brokers and that sort of thing. So I see the banks as not fighting the system at all. Actually, I see the banks as being covertly involved with the system, and quite willingly and passively, maybe aggressively, encouraging this transition. But nevertheless, I have to listen to the point of view that you just described, because I don't pretend to know everything, not even most of everything. And but at the moment, I don't see it quite that way. Maybe they don't even know where they're going with this. I try and read their own literature quite a bit, and I do find differences of opinion coming from different strata within the banking system. But they all seem to be in agreement on the basis that, well, however we evolve it, it's going to be good. They all want to participate. And I think there is some competition going on and maneuvering going on as to, well, we want to be the dominant player in this game. But I don't see anybody actually opposing it or resisting it. They're manipulating and maneuvering position within it, but they're all anxious to see it evolve.
And that's a good way of putting it too. Evolving, changing the model of what bankers have done. I mean, if they're going to continue to be relevant, they definitely need to change with the system. And it seems as if the current model, the fractional reserve banking model, and things to that effect, and our fiat system are coming to an end. And that's why we're at this really interesting point of which direction are we going to go, because it seems as if the United States has a new world order agenda, but that doesn't seem to be completely in line with all of the World Economic Forum stuff either. But there is some parallels. So it's almost as if there's a fight for who's going to be, which bad guy is going to end up running the show. It's like a bad guy fight and a tournament between the bad guys, and the winner shall rule them all. But you made an interesting point earlier too, and you said that it's not too late for us to change the path, the trajectory that we're on. And really, what I try to say, Mr. G, and this is something that I try to manifest by saying it out loud as much as I possibly can, which is the idea that when enough people take a stand, nothing can stand against the people, and we can peacefully change the world by just not participating and saying no. It would be a beautiful thing. Could you imagine that world?
Oh, I dream about that world. The only difference that I might have from that dream is that I don't see it happening just because people decide to stop participating. I see it happening because people decide to get off their fat couches and do something about it and become activists and take part in the political activities of their local communities and get out there where the front line is, get into organizations and combat and, you know, take a stand. And just to say, I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to pay my taxes, or I'm not going to use money. I'm going to use crypto or something, you know, but I'm not going to do anything to stop them. I'm just going to stop participating. I think that's a pathway to surrender eventually.
And that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you sharing that point of view. I mean, you definitely have a lot of wisdom to share, and I appreciate you doing that. Now, I kind of want to get your thoughts before we kind of get into like the Russia-Ukraine stuff, because I think that there is some parallels with what Russia's doing that parallels the Fed, kind of going against the IMF and the World Economic Forum. But what are your thoughts on CBDCs? Because this is the central bank digital currencies, the CBDCs.
Central bank digital currencies, of course. Well, I think that's the currency that they'll be using in the social credit system. And people must understand that not all cryptocurrencies are the same. And in fact, some of them aren't even crypto at all. They're just a new variation of digital currency, such as our credit card system. And the central bank digital currency, as I see it, is what they hope to, that's how they intend to participate in the new coming system. The banks, all of the banks will be issuing their own currencies, and they'll get service fees for all these transactions when people, all the obedient people do buy something in the grocery store, or they do put gasoline in their car, then the cryptocurrency will be, they'll have a fee attached to it, like on your credit card. So the banks will continue to do very well, but more as a processor of digital currency purchases. Now, a true cryptocurrency, of course, is what everybody dreams about, and how there were so many people excited about it when it first became a topic of discussion, is very hard to make universal so that people can buy anything they want with it, or even most things they want with it. It's I think that the central bank cryptos will be used primarily for primary purchases, the things that most people want. It'd be pretty hard to get what you need unless you use them. And they're not crypto at all. Every transaction is readily available. I mean, even non-governmental sources can figure out what transactions are on the blockchain. And so there's nothing secret about them at all. So we have to get in our minds the difference between the central bank currencies and the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, for example, and a lot of these other new currencies that are coming up, where people are striving very hard to keep it confidential so that governments cannot control it or observe it. But those so far are always sort of on the side chains, where you deal with just people in your local community or your friends or in your same organization. But when it comes out there to buying groceries and gasoline, you have to use the central bank currencies.
Right, which makes a lot of sense. And since you mentioned cryptocurrencies in general, what are your actual thoughts about Bitcoin per se, for example?
Well, I think that Bitcoin, for example, I just said for example because it's not the same for Bitcoin as for most of the new coins that are coming onto the market.
Right, which is the reason why I was saying Bitcoin specifically, because I didn't want to. We could go on a long discussion about all the different types of cryptocurrencies and what their position is, whether there's value there or anything, any use case. But Bitcoin is the OG, like yourself. It was the first cryptocurrency to come out. Everything is kind of weighed against it in the cryptocurrency market. Everything else is an altcoin. So, what's your thoughts about Bitcoin?
Well, my thoughts about Bitcoin is that it may become the gold standard in the crypto world, and that they deliberately, the managers of Bitcoin deliberately restricted the number of transactions that can be processed in 1 second, which is why it wasn't very long after Bitcoin was introduced that the delay times became unbearably long, so that it no longer was useful to buy a cup of coffee, because it might, in some cases, take an hour or several hours to clear the transaction, which just makes it unusable for common everyday transactions, which is why they began to develop side chains, as they call them, where the large corporations would develop their own adjunctive parallel clearinghouses for crypto. The large companies would have a large number of Bitcoin, but meanwhile they would sort of play with that number in their own pocket, and they would do transactions outside of the blockchain, and then at the end of the day they'd sell them all up and in one transaction, and you can afford to wait an hour for one transaction at the end of the day if it includes the clearing of maybe 20,000 small transactions. So, and Bitcoin managers had a chance to increase the size of the blockchain so they could operate at a faster rate, but chose not to do so, which was a dead giveaway to me, is that they didn't want Bitcoin to become useful as a universal clearinghouse for all transactions, but to become sort of like what the Federal Reserve does when it clears all the bank debits and credits at the end of the day, and the balance sheets are settled out once a day. But all the little banks around the country, in some cases, exceed their limits at points in the day, but they're not concerned about it because it'll be settled at the end of the day in a larger single transaction. So, all right, now the short answer to your question, I think that Bitcoin is probably going to be around for as long as blockchains are being used, and it may become the clearing currency between banks in crypto.
Okay.
And otherwise, I'm not clear in my mind how they're going to clear one central bank digital currency against another central bank digital currency unless they have something like Bitcoin. And since Bitcoin is already in existence and it's becoming rather stable in terms of its purchasing power compared to other cryptocurrencies,
Right.
I think that that's probably moving in the direction of becoming like the single asset that the banks will use to exchange their digital currencies between them.
Okay. And, listening to you answer that, I mean, it really surprises me that you actually know this much about the history, about the block size debate, because that was something in 2017, because you kind of try to downplay yourself at 90 years old, acting like you don't keep up with everything, and you're still very sharp and you still have a lot of knowledge to share. So I appreciate you being humble, but not many 90-year-old gentlemen are going to know about the things that you just discussed. So, I commend you for keeping up your research, because what you said is very correct. I feel I agree that Bitcoin is being kept limited on purpose, kept throttled so that other entities can profit off of solutions that doesn't necessarily fix the problem, unfortunately, which is a lot of what we see in the world happen. So to get back to the world, and again, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on Bitcoin. With Russia and Ukraine, I found it really interesting to kind of rewind a little bit. Before Trump was president, it seemed as if there's this big push from the BRIC nations banks, your Brazil, Russia, India, China, and other nations that were working within the BRIC nation banks. They were working towards a de-dollarization. I believe it was 2019 when China launched the petro yuan. And now with the Russia-Ukraine situation, we see kind of a petro ruble. We see the ruble going gold backed, and just the conflict in general. Now, as somebody who's experienced a lot in life, what are your thoughts about what is happening over in Europe between Russia and Ukraine? And I know this is just speculation. This is just more of your opinion, but if you don't mind, I'd appreciate you sharing.
No, I don't mind, as long as I make it clear to everybody that it's my opinion, at this point in time, I reserve the right to change my mind on these things as new material comes to the surface. But at this point in time, I can't forget the history. I can't forget the fact that Putin and Klaus Schwab are very close friends, and that Putin himself is a sort of a graduate of the World Economic Forum School for young leaders.
Young global leaders, yeah.
Young global leaders, yes. I can't forget the fact that Putin himself has a record of not a very high caliber standard of ethics. I can't forget that controlled opposition is the favorite weapon of the tyrants in the world today. I can't forget these things. And so I'm always looking for evidence of, is there a break in the pattern, or is it more of the same old, same old? And I see it more of the same old, same old. I think that in the Western world, more than in the Eastern world, but certainly in the United States and countries like England and so forth, where I think there's a desire to sustain the what shall we call it, the war industry. All right, I guess Eisenhower
The
called
war
it
machine, yeah.
the war machine. Yeah, and it's not only profitable. There's certain advantages if you're trying to change the attitude of citizens in a nation to abandon their traditional concepts of culture or concepts of judicial justice or anything, even religion. People will change when they're afraid, and fear has always been. We learned that from Machiavelli. Fear of war or rumors of war have always been useful to those who want to keep their citizens in line who otherwise might rebel because they didn't like what's going on. But if you can scare the heck out of people that there's a war going on and they better get behind their leaders or else we're going to lose the war, or there's a famine going on, or there's a food shortage going on, or there's a pandemic going on, or there's an environmental destruction going on, or there's a wave of terrorism going on, that sort of thing. Well, people stop thinking about what's happening to the judicial system. Well, how come our Bill of Rights has gone? All of the Bill of Rights except one, the Second Amendment, are already gone because of COVID. They don't even ask, nobody asks that question. What happened to the Bill of Rights? Isn't it in the Constitution? And people say, the heck with the Constitution. We got to fight against this COVID pandemic. And now we have to fight against these evil Russians, you see. And they forget the fact that the evil Russians and the evil Ukrainians are sort of the left, like the difference between the Republican and the Democrat Party. They fight against each other, but nothing changes regardless of which side is in power. The pattern continues the same. Maybe people haven't noticed that.
Right.
But so the short answer to your question is I see this as a continuation of the same old game that has been played against the public for decades. These are two sides that are controlled by the same intelligence, and we in the world are being asked to choose up one side or the other. We're not given a choice of, well, wait a minute, we don't like either side. That's not even on the table. You have to choose between this side or that side. And no matter which side you choose, you lose.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my answer. That's what I see going on in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. You cannot choose because neither side is worthy of it.
And yeah, I would agree with you. And you've seen a lot of things in your life. Now, one of the things that I had mentioned before we started recording was I was born in 1975. I'm 47 years old, just recently turned 47. And when I grew up in the 80s during the Reagan era, when he was president, there was this really anti-communist, and it was even before that, because I remember looking at shows in the 1970s like All in the Family with Archie Bunker. He was so anti-communist. And then I guess people before I was born kind of grew up with the threat of war between Russia and the United States. And it's really interesting to see since the 80s this whole anti-communist, anti-Russia movement and where it's progressed to today. It's almost as if the United States has become that which it used to hate. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you just said it. Not only the United States, but all of the Western countries we described them as our allies in World War II. We fought against the Nazis because they were a collectivist system and they denied the rights of their citizens to the citizens. And in the process of fighting that war, I could see it coming already that when I say we, I don't mean you and me, but our leaders decided that the only way to fight tyranny is to build our own tyranny, that we would lose if we weren't tyrannical because a constitution gets in the way. Abraham Lincoln sort of had to face that same problem during the Civil War. Everybody loves Abraham Lincoln because he freed the slaves, they think, but that was the image. But they didn't look at his record, and he was the greatest, up until that time, the greatest consolidator of power into the hands of the federal government. And of course, it was a war that did that. We're back to that theme again. And at times of war, people will not notice or care too much about the loss of their personal liberties. So here we are again, the same thing going on. And in the 60s, I was in a situation similar to what you described, because I was very much in the anti-communist movement. Now, that doesn't mean that I was on the wrong side, but what I didn't realize is that while we were so concerned about the rise of communism and what it represented, we forgot to notice that our own government was becoming closer and closer and closer to the very ideal that we were fighting against. Now, from this perspective, so many decades later, we can go back and say, yeah, we're already there now. We're there. We're exactly what we fought against, but we don't think about that. Because it's because we're afraid of everything. And our leaders are deliberately throwing these boogeymen at us. And some of them are pretty scary, I have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
But I also recognize that they're going out of their way to avoid a solution. They love the conflict. They love the threat. And that's what they do. They destroy. They want us on our knees. They want us shivering and shaking in fear, trembling, asking for support, for food and shelter, defense against all these evil external things. And that can be, once you understand the game that's being used and played against us, then you can see it showing up in every aspect that we've talked about. It's relatively simple, but it's so hard to accept because it's so contrary to what we think human nature is. We think, well, people should be trying to solve these problems. And we can't imagine that our own leaders, the people we respect and voted for, would actually be trying to destroy the things which we cherish. So that's the big hurdle. And it was a big hurdle for me. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
Yeah, no, that's so correct. And I mean, when I look at in retrospect of World War II, in theory, Germany lost, but the movement behind Germany won because it definitely infiltrated itself in all governments around the world. And even looking at some different history aspects from late 1800s, early 1900s, that was pretty much the vibe of most of the world. Was very anti-communist, anti-socialist, especially in Europe. There was a lot of people because there was a big push for it. And it's really interesting what you mentioned about Putin and the World Economic Forum, because he was part of the young global leaders, but it's been omitted now from the website. You actually, I have to go back in a Wayback Machine and look from a couple months back, 4 months back or so, maybe even a little bit longer, to see where he was on the website. And then there's a lot of information with Klaus Schwab bragging about the Canadian Parliament being a lot of young global leaders. So it's where they've taken these prospects of individuals and really try to groom them and put them in positions in power, infiltrate them in government so that they could ultimately push for this global agenda, which is, I think, a lot of times where a lot of this seems confusing, because there's a duality in a lot of things. And it almost seems like a lot of infighting within the governments as well, where you have these infiltrators from the World Economic Forum pushing for this agenda, and then you have these other politicians trying to push for this agenda, and we get this big crazy conflict. And another thing that you said that's really important for people to take note of is fear is definitely a mind killer, and is being utilized 100%. So before we revisit the Red Pill Expo and wrap up with the rest of the things that you're involved in currently, the last real question I have for you is, at 90 years old, you have provided a lot of information to a lot of individuals. You've taught and inspired a lot of people like myself. What would be your message to people that are younger to inspire them to get on a path that you chose to get on very early in life and maintain and stay on, even today, when you could be enjoying retirement, not doing any of these things? You put in your work, but you're still here doing it. And I commend you and I appreciate you, but I would love for you to pass some knowledge and inspiration on to the younger generations to inspire them and ignite this fire so that we can have enough people to take a stand so that we can make changes in this world.
It's a good question. That question often is asked. And interestingly enough, I seem to have a different answer each time it's asked, depending on my mood, I guess, or what I read in the news that particular morning. But today the answer comes to this. And I have to preface it by saying I'm not speaking to all the young people. And by that I mean that I've discovered that the history of the world has always been written by a small percentage of the population. It's never been written by the majority or the masses. Now, this is not elitist talk. This is historical knowledge. The American Revolution, for example, one of the greatest events of all history, changed history, not only in our country, but around the world. It was led by 1% of the population, which were the thought leaders. And then 3% of the population joined in, making 4%. The influencers, those were the shopkeepers, the business people, the politicians. They were in the various colonial governments, the military, and the educated people, and the ones that were influence over others. And then another 11% joined in and formed the corpus of 15% of the population. And the balance was the Crusaders. So you had a 15% group of Crusaders who were on fire, the fire in their bellies for freedom, and they could not stand the idea of being slaves. Not only that, they decided to do something about it. And so 15% of the American Revolution, I should say of the colonial population, fought the American Revolution. And there were 15% on the other side who were in favor of the king, the crown, and they were the opponents. And then that 60%, that 70% in the middle didn't know what the heck was going on and had no strong feelings. They were going to go with whatever side won. Now, that's how it was. And a lot of them had to get out of the country. They went to Canada so they wouldn't have to choose up sides. That's always been the case in history. So I preface my answer to your question by reminding your audience that this is still true, I believe, at least in the world. And so I'm speaking to the 15%, knowing that within that 15%, there will be 3% and 1%. I'm speaking to that group of Crusaders when I answer your question. I think the first thing I would want to see the 15%ers do is to be very clear as to what they're fighting for. That sounds silly, doesn't it? Well, we're fighting for liberty, right? We're fighting for freedom. We're fighting against tyranny. That's not enough. We have to know at a deeper level, what is freedom based upon? What is necessary for people to have a free society? Many people think that freedom is just not being in jail. It's a lot more than that. We have to understand that certain conditions have to exist in society before you can have a free society. And it's not just a desire to be free. It's not just a willingness to fight to be free, because you could fight against a tyrant and some leader could come along and say, he's our man because he quotes the Constitution and he says, let's do something good for our country. And yet he could still be worse than the tyrant we fight against. So it's the idea. It's not the physical form of freedom, but the idea of freedom. So finally, I come to the answer. In order to have that idea of what causes or it makes or allows freedom, you have to distinguish between two ideologies: collectivism on the one side and individualism on the other side. That's what it's all about. And many people have never really heard those words. Collectivism is the idea behind communism, fascism, Nazism, socialism, New Dealism, whatever you want to call it. They're all the same. Take the labels off. Look underneath the labels, and you find this idea of collectivism, which is the idea that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. That's what we're fighting against. And the opposite of that ideology is individualism, which is, no, the group is not the center of society, or should not be the center of society, because, first of all, the group doesn't even exist. The word group is an abstraction. It's a mathematical concept.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your
As a
wisdom.
group,
I think
it's
you
like
just
the number 7. You
just
cannot
locked.
see 7.
You just had an internet issue. Sorry about that.
Are we having to close off?
No, this is
Is
the
that what-
internet just for on your end. The internet
okay,
kind
all
of
right. I thought
glitched
maybe
just for a
well, I'll
quick
try and wrap
second. I
this up.
apologize.
We're probably running out of our time anyway. So I was saying that the group doesn't even exist. It's an abstraction. It's like the number 7. You cannot see 7. You can see 7 glasses of water and so forth, but you can't see 7. You cannot see forest. You cannot see a forest. There's no such thing as a forest. There are trees. You can see a lot of trees, but they're individual trees. You get my point. This idea of a group is an abstraction. It's an amazing realization I came to years ago, that the corporation, for example, is a group. It's an abstraction. The corporation doesn't exist as such, even though it says it exists on a piece of paper. But all the corporation is an agreement between human beings of how they're going to divide the profits and who gets to direct this, that, and the other thing. And governments they don't exist. They're just people. And so that's what we're fighting against. It's people against this abstraction called the group. And there's always some tyrant or some demagogue that comes along who says, I speak for the group. I speak for the people. And of course, that's the worst tyrant of all, because he fools the people into thinking that, by golly, maybe he is speaking for us. So I'll close by saying the lynch mob is probably the best example of what I'm talking about. In a lynch mob, there's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. So that's democracy. That's the game we're playing with when we advocate democracy. Is we're really advocating lynch mobs. So our founding fathers created something called a republic, and that's different from a democracy, very clearly. And our founding fathers said so. They thought a democracy was the worst possible type of government, and they're right, because it always ends up in tyranny, always, and economic ruin and collapse. When the majority people realize that they can, by their vote alone, they can plunder the minority, and they can take winner take all in an election. And that's what it's become now in the United States and around the world. Winner take all. That's not the kind of system we want. So my answer to your question is, I want young people and old people alike to start thinking about what we're fighting for and who the enemy really is. It's not Republicans or Democrats. It's not the Chinese. It's not the Russians or the Ukrainians. It's not the Jews. It's not the blacks or the whites. It's not the Catholics. It's not any of these things. It's people. That's why we have trouble with identity politics, because they want to put people into groups. And the fact of the matter is that all of the evil in the world today is done by none of these categories I've just said or that you can think of, but by individuals within those categories. And those are the enemy, not because of the group that they belong to, but because of what they do. And what they do is to promote collectivism. Now, that is the understanding that everybody must come to if they hope to overthrow the tyranny that faces us in the world today. Because unless we understand that, we will lose. But if we do understand it, the idea is so compelling and so beautifully true that you see it immediately once you think it through, that we cannot lose. We cannot lose if we get that understanding. So that's where our strength will come from, is from knowledge. So that's where I would start, is with knowledge.
Well, Mr. G, thank you as always. I appreciate you taking the time to share that wisdom. Before we do wrap up, I will include links down below for the Reality Zone, also for redpilluniversity.org, for the Red Pill Expo, which is going to be coming up July 9th and 10th in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I encourage you to go out and attend. I might be attending myself. I will update people and let everyone know. I'll also include links for Mr. G's Twitter account. And Mr. G, the one last thing I wanted to ask you, because I was noticing on your Twitter account that you are the editor of Need to Know News, and you had mentioned it to me before we started recording. What exactly is the Need to Know News website?
Well, Need to Know News is, as the word suggests, it's a news service. And we go through the news of the day every day. We publish 3 times a week, but we follow the news carefully. And we find stories that we think contain within them the gem of lessons about the very things I've been talking about. And unfortunately, many of the stories, as we find them, they'll give you facts and data, but they don't tell you what the meaning of what's happening is. And so I thought our role would be to take a story and break it down into the essential elements and to try and make it clear in just a couple of sentences for those of us who are in a hurry. You know, we have lives to live. They can't spend all day long reading news reports, and to make it clear in just a summary of what the story is all about and what it means in terms of collectivism versus individualism. And so that's what we do. And I'm happy to say a lot of people seem to think it's worthwhile, because we have a constantly growing readership, and people seem to like the idea that we can boil down all the news, and within maybe 15 or 20 minutes, they can, or less even, they can get up to speed on the essence of what's happening in the world that day. And then if a particular story interests them, they can delve into it more deeply if they wish. But our job is to make it easy and quick to read and to understand.
Awesome. Well, again, I do appreciate you taking the time to explain that. And I will have everything I just mentioned and we shared on today's video linked in the video description. And I definitely encourage people to check that out. If you could bear with me 1 second, Mr. G is going to wrap up the recording. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I do appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you check out that first conversation I had with Mr. G. Again, it is linked in the video description. And you can also find it in my playlist section. I just recently released it a few months ago as a Rice Rewind in January of this year, 2022. So be sure to check that out. If this is your first time watching any of my videos, I encourage you to make sure you're subscribed. And I will leave you with this. Be blessed, be the change, practice change. And I'll see you on the next show.